Who was Qasem Soleimani? What happened between Iran and America? And where do we go from here? I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. I wanted to wait until more information came out regarding the Iran and America situation before I made an episode about it, because I wanted to give you the full picture and not just speculation. I feel like there's been enough news reported that we can do that. As I'm sure you guys are already aware, this entire debacle began when America killed an Iranian general named Qasem Soleimani. We all know that, but who exactly is Qasem, and what more can we learn about him to make the picture a little bit less murky? We know that he got taken out, but for what reasons, and do these reasons impact our judgment on the situation? Some parts of the media are currently defending Qasem. They're talking about him personally, using some very forgiving words when describing him, and other channels are condemning him outright. So, what is the truth? The fact is that Qasem is a general within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, but at the same time, he is the commander of the Quds Force, and this here is key when breaking down who exactly he was. Now, let's begin with the conclusion and work our way backwards through the evidence. Qasem Soleimani was a bona fide terrorist. That is a fact, and we have evidence to back it up. Now, although Soleimani was a terrorist, there is a separate debate to actually be had that is valuable about what the best way is to handle somebody like him, and that it's separate from the facts of the matter. He is a bad guy. This is not where the debate should be being had, but the media, as it always does, chooses to polarize the topic and pit Americans, Canadians, and people against each other, so nobody understands what the truth is. So, why do I say that Soleimani was a terrorist? The answer lies largely in the Quds Force that he is the commander of. That is a military, terroristic division of Iran's armed forces. As their commander, he is complicit in their actions. The Quds Force is strictly responsible for extraterritorial operations. In other words, he deals with issues outside of Iran, aka the neighboring regions in the Middle East. Their mandate includes unconventional warfare and spreading their political aims. They want their ideology and whatever their priorities are to become the dominant thinking pieces of that entire region. So, how exactly has the Quds Force spread terror? They do it two ways, directly and indirectly. One of these popular mechanisms that they utilize is by encouraging and supporting other groups to carry out their objectives on their behalf. They do that by funding terrorist organizations like Hezbollah. Hezbollah means Party of God, and they're considered a terrorist organization by the US, Canada, the Arab League, Argentina, the UK, and many others. The Quds Force empowers them to carry out their mandate. The Quds Force also supports Hamas. Hamas is the organization responsible for a lot of the wars being waged against Israel right now, and repeatedly, they use their military wing to accomplish that. The US and the EU classify them as a terrorist organization. The Quds Force, again, also supports the Islamic Jihad movement, which professes military violence. Canada, Japan, the US, the EU, New Zealand, and a bunch of other countries all regard them as a terrorist organization. I'm sure you're seeing a trend here. I can go on for quite some time actually, just outlining the plethora of nefarious groups that the Quds Force is responsible for supporting and enabling, and that's all under Soleimani himself. He's the general, the commander. He gives power willingly to these terrorist organizations, and the Quds Force is implicit in these crimes. The Quds Force themselves are also considered a terrorist organization by Canada and the US. You can't be the head of a terror group, funding numerous other terror groups, and not be a terrorist yourself. Now, I also didn't even touch on the operations that the Quds Force carries out themselves. A lot of these examples have been their implicit ways of empowering terroristic movements, but they take action on their own fronts as well. They've been caught up in numerous political scandals, and this person, Qasem, has been sanctioned by groups like the UN for all the things that he's been a part of already. When the Quds Force is not carrying out these missions on their own, they're empowering other terror groups to do it on their behalf. So, Soleimani, he's obviously no saint working on peacekeeping missions. He is the complete opposite of that. The media did a terrible job explaining just who exactly we're talking about here. He's no honorary member of the Iran government. He was the leader of a terrorist ring of the military that supported numerous other terrorist groups across the Middle East. This is the basis that we all have to have in common because it is rooted in fact and reason. From here we can debate about whether or not killing him was the right choice, but for some people to be defending him as if he was some sort of martyr or someone who died for a positive cause is completely ludicrous. Now, the stick that broke the camel's back appeared to be the attack on an American embassy, and that's what triggered America to go forward and take him out. It was believed that he was responsible for organizing those attacks, and prior to even that, there's been months of escalation happening with Iran in America, such as the debacle of shooting down the American drone that happened during the summer. What America ended up doing was a strong arm to seize further advancement and escalation against their interests, and this is where the critical question comes up. Soleimani was indeed a bad actor, but was this the appropriate way to deal with him? What America is trying to do is put forward a policy of deterrence. They're essentially laying down the law and saying, if you continue to fight against what we consider to be good interest, we are going to hold you accountable to that, and you're going to face consequences. They're going to do things like take out your military generals if you continue to do things like attack their embassy, like try to advance terror across the region. It's essentially a consequence you're putting above their head to make sure they stay in line. Two things can be true at once though. So first, Soleimani was indeed the head of a terrorist wing of military operations, and America could have handled this better. For example, Congress did not debate in motion on this attack. It was essentially Trump carrying it out based on his own intuition. It was a swift blow, which is arguably necessary given some type of peculiar circumstances, and you can also argue against that though by saying that not going through the proper procedures is a slippery slope. Those things are both true, and you have to find a balance between them. At the base level though, we should all be able to agree that the world is likely a better place without Soleimani in it, but we can debate about the ways that we could have neutralized that threat in a more effective manner. That's one of the beauties of debate, and by not having that opportunity to talk to other politicians about the possible avenues of neutralization, we didn't have that available to us. America solely went forward and performed what they thought was the best action possible, and this issue goes beyond just American politics because America could have consulted their allies, like Canada. Maybe we knew something, maybe we had an idea on the best way to go about doing this, but we did not have that situation, and luckily, it didn't lead to a disastrous outcome, as I'm going to reveal in the coming minutes. So after the attack on Soleimani, people foolishly broke out into World War III hysteria, and others broke out into World War III memes, but some people were actually very concerned about this being a possibility. The bottom line is that it was never going to devolve into that. Iran could not go to battle with America and survive. I'm not too sure how anyone could believe that was a legitimate threat. The only way World War III happens is if Iran teams up with China and Russia. Then you'll have America and Europe and Canada fighting that battle. It can go either way. That's a scary thought, but Iran by themselves, it's not possible. Iran knew that themselves as well, and they never wanted a war with America because they knew about the outcome that awaited them. But what they did do was try to play the populace. They tried to scare the masses, and some people actually bought into that. They issued the typical propaganda of, we promise repercussions and death to America, and whatever else they said. But what really happened? Iran retaliated, but to a minor degree, only to save face and to show their citizens that they were going to fight back on their behalf and whatnot, but really, it was a hollow shell of that. Iran, in the dead of night, fired off missiles into an American base in Iraq, and they did this in a very peculiar way. They ensured that there would be a high likelihood of not causing damage. Yes, they fired missiles off, and that's all they needed to do. They didn't want to kill anyone, they didn't want to destroy too many things, but they wanted to save their face. You can actually view this as one of those people who gets into a fight and they pull the hold me back bro card. Now I'm not critiquing it though, because I think this is actually the best possible outcome for everyone. We didn't want America to actually enter a conflict with Iran, which would have been possible if Iran stopped thinking. If they relied solely on their emotion and they were super furious that they didn't care about what happened to them, and they set off a bomb that actually injured Americans, and they started taking drastic measures, well, there you go. You have a war now, and you're basically screwed. But, luckily for everyone, Iran was thinking about it, and they knew that they wanted to do two things. They wanted to save their face, but at the same time, they did not want a full-on conflict. So, shortly after they attacked that Iraqi-American base, They say that we're done. We have retaliated with adequate responses, and now we're seeking peace. And what do you know? Trump says the same thing. He's extending his hand in peace as well, and I think that's the best way to go about it. It's a fair bargain for America. They took out Qasem Soleimani, and Iran gets to save a little bit of the reputation by shooting off some rockets at a base that killed nobody. But one factor that complicates the equation with a tinge of tragedy was Iran's blunder after they attacked the American military base. So, a couple hours after that, they shot down a plane. It was a Ukrainian plane filled with over 60 Canadians, and the going theory is it was an accident. So, after Iran shot at the American base, presumably their personnel, the military personnel who are in charge of the air defense, was, you could say, pretty skittish. They were worried that something was going to happen. Typically, if you attack an American asset, you can expect to have them come down hard on your head. So, they may have been on high alert. They may have been super eager and anxious about pushing that button. And when something popped up on their radar, it was simply a plane, a passenger plane, trying to leave Iran, but somehow, some way, a mistake happened and Iran blew the plane up with anti-air missiles. Now at this point, the American Pentagon and Iraqi military personnel have confirmed that the plane was in fact taken down by missiles. The only speculation is the part about it being an accident, and to me that makes the most sense though, because for Iran to purposely shoot down a plane with that many Canadians and that many international citizens, it's completely foolish, and to do it within their own country, in their capital, I don't see that as being something that delivers a powerful message to the world. Quite the opposite. You don't do well, obviously, in your capital by causing that wreckage there, and at the same time, you give countries like Canada a reason to try and come after you if it is revealed that it was intentional. Why would Iran want that when they were so careful not to anger America in the first place? The one thing I will say is that Iran is super lucky there weren't Americans on that plane, because the way Trudeau handled things was he thought about it, he wanted to do an investigation, but if that was Trump's people, 60 Americans who got blown up in what would seem to be a retaliatory effort, Iran would be finished. Trump would not take the time to think about it. He probably wouldn't consider that it was accidental. There would just be missiles and bombs dropping over that country. So although I do think that it was very likely to be accidental, that still doesn't take away the blame from Iran. They have to be held responsible, at least to the families of the victims. Iran murdered a bunch of innocent civilians for no good reason. Even if you consider it to be an accident, they still have to own up to it and deliver some form of justice or reparations to the victims' families, because it's just an all-around tragedy. On top of that, for us, if you're a Canadian, those are Canadian citizens. It's unacceptable, and Iran has to own up to it. At the very least, a full-on investigation has to be launched, and we need to find out the truth of the matter. And now that brings us to today. America is supposedly looking for peace, and Iran is too. That's a good thing. I don't think anyone wants to see this escalated further. Shake hands, make a deal, and end it right here. America gets Soleimani out of the picture, and Iran gets to save face a little bit. That's fine with me, and it's a win-win. Now, despite all of that though, you can actually argue that the bigger overarching issue with Iran is the possibility of nuclear weapons, and that's the real crux of the problem. This is exactly what the nuclear deal was supposedly going to restrict, but that deal has evaporated and fallen to pieces as of late. Although Iran largely stuck to the terms of the deal, I don't think it was a good deal in particular, because it doesn't curb the issue at hand fully. Just because a party complies with the terms of an agreement doesn't mean the terms are inherently good. The nuclear deal effectively limited Iran's enriched uranium supply over a period of time, but not effectively enough, I would argue, especially when that period of time is only between 10 to 15 years for certain conditions. They went from being able to build a nuke prior to the deal in 3 months to being able to build a nuke in 1 year under the deal. It's not that much of an improvement. Of course you can say, yeah, those amount of months matter, but does it really matter when you don't understand the intention? If Iran wants to build a nuke, building it in 3 months to 1 year isn't going to stop anything unless you have the proper procedures in place to handle the threat. The uranium enrichment restriction that Iran was under, which led to that increase in 9 months from nuke building, was limited to only 15 years as well. Iran was only under contract 15 years, and after that, they were not held accountable to the agreement anymore. And in return for that, in return for being able to build a nuke. 9 months later, Iran had received a massive gift. Sanctions were lifted off them from countries like America and Europe, and they made billions of dollars off of that. Now, the question is, what happens in the future? When the agreement is over and you come back to the bargaining table, you have a richer Iran who isn't as ready to bend over to your will because they have billions of dollars in reserve. The only reason why we were able to get them to sign this agreement in the first place is because the sanctions were hurting them a lot. They were missing out on billions of dollars and they were a growing country. They needed that, and so they were vulnerable in the deal-making process. The same situation may no longer be true in the future. It's actually quite likely to be the opposite. They're going to have a considerable amount of power that they're going to bring to the table. That was the perfect opportunity to create a deal, but it needed to be able to create an environment where it's far harder to build a nuke, not just 9 months in delay, and they also needed to create a far larger sum of years attached to the agreement. 10 years, 15 years, it's not enough. It's a silly deal. They wasted their opportunity. This was a supposed middle ground, where we compromised a little bit, Iran compromised a little bit, but in this case, a middle ground isn't good enough. It's not a desirable outcome. We want no countries ever in the future to gain more nukes. Quite the opposite, actually. These are the tools that can bring about apocalypse in the world in the wrong hands. We want to slowly curb countries away and disarm people going into the future. I am not convinced that this agreement did that, and it seems to me that it's quite possible that the agreement would make it harder to do so in the future. You must understand that a theocracy is a dangerous type of government establishment to combine with military desires and to give them a nuke at the same time. It's a recipe for impending disaster. Now, although the issue may simmer down for now, the tensions with Iran expected to come up again in the future because this issue here is far from being solved. The nuclear weapons topic is sure to resurface, and I'd wager that'll be the center of the next feud. That is something to keep your eye on, especially because the nuclear deal has been backed away from by Trump and Iran at the same time. A new agreement's going to come up in the future, and that's going to be contentious as usual. So, that now brings me to the end of today's conversation. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.